episode 576 comes to you live on the 7th of October 2022 at a special start time of 5:20 p.m. IST. Well, the T20 series is over and it's time for the ODI series. Though it's irrelevant in the context of what has been happening, that each and every team is preparing for the T20 World Cup by playing more and more matches and making sure that all their 15-16 players have been given enough chances. And then comes a ODI series in the middle of a T20 preparation. Is it necessary? Well, everything is necessary. Nothing is seen as out of context, and therefore, for me, this ODI series, 3-match ODI series, I would have preferred a 5-match ODI series, but the schedule is tight and cramped, so they could only squeeze in 3 matches because South Africa also needs to head to Australia and prepare in their own manner. So, what happened last night? South Africa scored in 40 overs 4 for 249, which was a good score considering they started slowly, and then once again it was David Miller and Henrik Klaasen who did the job. So after South Africa scored 4 for 249, the question always was, can the B team, which is the team that doesn't have the gargantuan players, and we all know who those gargantuan players are, in the present day context, the gargantuan players are no Kohli, no Rohit, no Pandya, no Sky, no Pant, no many more and others, no Karthik. I would see Karthik in the 50 over format as well. So no Rohit, no Kohli, no Pandya, no Suryakumar Yadav, no Pant and no Karthik. And without these, the so-called B team still managed to give South Africa a run for their money and stretch the total till 8 for 240. So what does it mean in the context of what will be the 50 over World Cup in over 12 months' time? Because after 12 months, the 50 over World Cup will start. The preparation needs to be there. And I think post the 50 over World Cup, the questions and the conversations around the transition will also start. Is India ready to pass on the baton? Are the gargantuan players, especially those who are in their mid-30s and around 34, 35, are they ready to pass on the baton to the newer players? For me, the transition will be as smooth as silk because you have ready future Hall of Famers, ready the likes of Sanju Samson, Ishan Kishan, Deepak Hooda, Gaikwad, Pant, Iyer, and the rest. And these will become from the B team or the fringe team to the A team in the next 4 to 5 years, and add Shardul Thakur as an all-rounder. And therefore, I'm surprised why haven't they not included Shardul Thakur in the 20 over team as a backup to Pandya, because we know what can happen. Hardik Pandya is prone to injuries. We don't want him, we don't want a situation where he doesn't play. So Shardul Thakur would have been the perfect like for like fast bowling all-rounder for Pandya, but the selectors have their own mind, which I think is something that needs to be relooked. And therefore, yesterday's performance, of course, it's irrelevant in the present day context, but we always look towards 12 months preparation, and I think it was perfect preparation. Yes, chasing 250, we did not get off to an ideal start when we lost our openers, and our number 3 and 4 were a little conservative and a little slow. And had they given those 15-20 extra runs, it's always hindsight. Hindsight is always seen as something brilliant. In hindsight, had the likes of Gaikwad and Kishan gone a little faster, accelerated, instead of being 40 runs in 15 overs, had we been 60 runs in 15 overs, those 20 runs it would have made a huge difference because it allowed the likes of Shreyas Iyer, who's got nothing to lose, and Sanju Samson, who is putting everything right, who's doing all the effort to make sure that he is part of the A team. He becomes the A team in the next 3 to 4 years because I am seeing Sanju Samson in the same light as one sees Dinesh Karthik right now, as someone who is in and out whenever he gets a chance. He performs. Shreyas Iyer, Sanju Samson, Ishan Kishan, Prithvi Shaw, Shubman Gill, Rituraj Gaikwad, Deepak Hooda, and Rishabh Pant are going to be the players to look forward to in the next 4 to 5 years. And this question, let me tell you, next year in November 23, once the 50 over World Cup finishes, everyone will start asking, especially the PPED media, which continues to sully the Indian performances. Of course, they're already questioning the Indian Cricket Board's logic to have a 50 over tournament in the middle of a 20 over World Cup preparation. I do not agree with this fact that they're questioning it. I do not agree at all. I think it's perfect. Had there been more time in the schedule, I would have preferred at least 5-6 matches. It would have given more chances because there are some players who may never get a chance. And then when it comes to the question of captaincy, well, 10 years ago, did you presume someone like Kohli would be the captain? No. So a few years from now, would you presume that the likes of Shubman Gill and Prithvi Shaw and Rituraj Gaikwad and Ishan Kishan and Rishabh Pant, all of them are good captaincy contenders? Whether they have captain at the domestic level or not has become highly irrelevant. And I think whatever the PPED media wants to say and whatever silly ideas they have and whatever they want to sully the team with their silly ideas, I'm not going to agree. Another interesting thing was that while there was a B team or the so-called B team in the middle of the ground as players, even the commentary box had the B team because all the so-called A team left for Australia. And who were left? The dropouts. So if you look at the commentary panel right now, maybe except for one or two individuals, it consists of B team, C team. They're also not the first choice commentators for any broadcaster because the main ones have left for Australia or they don't think the 50 over tournament is relevant to them. So they are taking a break and will surely leave for Australia in the next few days. Once the proper tournament begins, it will be left to the B team to do all the job when it comes to the 50 over series or any of the domestic matches. It's left to the B team and the C team. If one can say that there is a fringe team or there's a second string team in the context of players, and there's a second string team, there's a B class team in the context of commentators as well. And that's how things are. But while we talk about the performance of the Indian men's team and how they have risen despite the loss, do you know there's a women's Asian Champions Trophy going on? Did you know that? It's been going on for the past week. But except for the broadcasters and the commentators and individuals who were directly involved, that is the websites and all, no one else would even know that there is a women's tournament going on. So the question becomes, which was a bigger day? Which will be a bigger day, 7th October or 23rd October? Well, 7th October has already passed by in the context of the India-Pakistan women's game. But it did not get the hype the men's team gets. When the women's team hardly ever gets the hype the men's team gets. They fly under the radar. They're rarely seen in advertisements, 17:30 endorsements. While the men's Asia Cup, for one whole month, the broadcasters kept showing old matches of the Men's Asia Cup, the World Cup, especially the ones where we had won, they kept on repeating it, repeating it, repeating it. The broadcasters are still repeating it. There was no such practice when it came to the women's division. So the women's team, just like the hockey men's team, flies under the radar. You won't even know there is a tournament going on unless you have access to newspapers or any pseudo media site, or someone tells you casually, like me, that there was actually India Pakistan women's game tonight. What happened in that game? Well, if this was the men's team and we had lost, it would have become a huge deal. People would have started shedding crocodile tears, but there is not even an effort to shed one tear because sadly the Indian women's team lost to Pakistan. And how do I look at that? Well, I was just looking at score updates. I couldn't watch the actual match. I'll watch the highlights and I'll talk about it more in the upcoming episodes. But going by how the match went and what the websites were saying, in a women's game, if a team manages to score between 130 and 140, that's as good as between 180 and 200 for a men's game. You would think 137, 138 is nothing. But let me remind you, in a women's division, I've seen it plenty of times. All they have to do is they have to get to somewhere between 140, 145, and that's good enough. That's a winning score in the women's division game. Do you know that after the Women's Asian Champions Trophy, there's a Women's 20 over World Cup scheduled next year? Did you know that? No. All the focus is on the men's 20 over World Cup and all the focus on how the men's team will perform. So don't expect to see a lot of pages dedicated to the women's team performances. Of course, they have lost, which is always not good. But when the men's team loses, it's on the first page of the newspaper. It's always there on the first page of the newspaper. And that's not hockey. And that's not badminton. That's only one game. Whatever the obsession, well, let's hope that the Indian team learns from these performances, because from whatever I could gather through score updates, they never look like accelerating right from ball one. They allowed Pakistan to reach 138, which is a huge deal in the women's game, because in the women's game, a fast bowler and a spinner, the only difference between a fast bowler and a spinner is that one has a slightly longer run-up, the other one bowls from just bowls from the crease, but the speeds are the same. If a fast bowler in the women's division bowled at 66 miles per hour, the spinner bowled at 46 miles per hour. And then in the women's game, you see loopy full tosses, and it's always baffled me that why are the boundary ropes shortened in the women's game? The answer is such that the presumption is that women's team won't be able to hit as powerfully as the men's team, which is anyways something which should have been not allowed in the first place, but it's been there, everyone accepts it. So let's go with that for now. So the logic is that unlike the men's team, where the boundaries are right until the end of the ground or till the advertising hoardings, just the gap is not much. In the women's division, women don't have the strength to hit big shots, therefore the boundary is brought back in. The only sport where there's a huge difference in the rules between the men's and women's game, that it's a 25-meter inner circle. The distance between the boundary and the hoarding is almost like seeing CP and what's between inner circle and outer circle of CP. The gap between the boundary and the hoarding it's like saying A block and B block of Connaught Place, if you understand the context. That's the huge gap. And therefore, when 4s and 6s are hit, the place where a catch can be taken It's a six. The place where the batters or the bowlers can prevent the boundary, it's a boundary. And this strange differentiation is something which I never understood, but it's been there for a while. Everyone accepts it, and therefore you don't see too many fours or sixes as far as the women's division are concerned. Very few women are able to hit. One of them being member of the Indian team, but for them, strike rate of 110, 115 is acceptable. You will rarely see a strike rate of 140, 150. It's a rare thing. Maybe someone from Australia has a strike rate of 170, but that's in a short career because that will certainly change if that member of the team doesn't score for a couple of matches or doesn't score too fast. So you won't see women's, very rarely you will see a woman scoring 45 or 20. They'll be happy scoring 45 or 35. We're happy with that. The coaches are happy. The team is happy, so a strike rate between 115, 120, 125 is acceptable in a women's game. And when I see the statistics, rarely will you see that everyone has a strike rate over 100. So people are happy with 89, 90, 95. That's how things are. And if a batter has a strike rate of 130 plus, it's seen as something extraordinary. 130 strike rate in the men's game is vanilla. You are expected to have a strike rate of 130 in a men's game in a 20 over game. But in a women's division, strike rate of 130, well, you would fall down on your feet and say, wow, you are a great batter. But that's how this women's sport is played. It's as chalk and cheese as it can be from the men's game because of the rules where there are the boundary ropes are brought in. Not every tournament will you see the DRS being used. For example, in this tournament, the DRS is not being used. Maybe the host nation doesn't have the budget or it's expensive. But in the men's game, unless it's an exception, every men's tournament, whether it's a multi-nation tournament or a private tournament, there will be DRS. So while the India-England series, a private tournament, one saw the DRS as a feature. In this particular tournament, it's not there, which is strange. Despite it being organized by the Asian Cricket Board, still they did not have DRS. Women's DRS is a rare thing. It's not uniform throughout. In the men's game, as I said, whether it's a private tournament or a public tournament, and if the governing body can have the budget, they will surely make sure that utilize DRS. Even the boundary hoarding did not have the advertisements. They were plain white boundaries as you would have seen in the 80s and the mid 90s. So that's how this tournament is being treated. Under the radar, double header matches. None of the matches are being broadcasted late night. All the matches are finishing in the evening time. And before you know, by the time you wake up, have your breakfast, one match is over. You start preparing for lunch and you have your tea, the second match is over. So if you don't have access to the schedule, and of course, if you don't have time, you will miss out on both the matches. That's how the matches are scheduled. And it's happening in a country where you will rarely see floodlights. And women's game, unless it's a rare situation, usually happens in the morning and mid-afternoon time. That's been the norm for a long time, and everyone accepts this bizarre norm, but it's a norm nevertheless. But coming back to this game, yes, it's disappointing that they could not chase 138, but 138 may as well be 190 at the men's division level. So it was already a good score. You needed to score at 7 runs per over, which means after 10 overs you had to be at least between 70 and 75. You can accelerate, but in the women's game you could be 30 from 3 overs and suddenly you could be 50 for 5 from 10 overs. That's how quickly it changes. It changes more rapidly than the weather of a city. A team may find itself 40 for 0 in 4 overs, but such is the psychological part of a women's game that the fielding team doesn't feel bad. They know in a matter of moments, the next 6 overs, they can have them reduced to 50 for 5. Next 6 overs, 10 runs. The batting team will also slow down. That's how this game is played. It's played more at a psychological level because of the assumption that women don't have the power rating prowess, which I don't agree with, but it's been accepted for a while, and that's how this particular sport is played, and that is what puts me off, but that's how it is. So this was the case. 7th October comes before 23rd October. Whether 23rd October will go in the same direction or a different direction, one doesn't know. And one more thing, in the women's game, batting first is the more logical option than bowling first. Chasing in a women's game is never easy. Very few teams can chase, Australia being an exception. But chasing in a women's game, it's a rarity. Whether it's 50 overs or 20 overs. So, what's the formula in a women's game? Win the toss, bat first, get to 140. In a 20 over game, win the toss, bat first, get to 260, 270. In a 50 over game, and unless the other team is smart, you are on a winning streak. Episode 577 will come to you live on the 10th of October 2022.